Hi everybody, my name's Amanda Evans and I'm here to speak to you about thinking outside the box for HACCP Success. What we would like to be able to look at in this session is probably the first thing I need you to do is make sure you've got a notepad or something, because I will be asking you some questions which you may want to jot down your answers, which will help you get through the information. I'm trying to make it as interactive as possible for a webinar. So I thank you for joining me today. So as I said before, my session's on Think Outside the Box for HACCP Success. Now just a little bit of background on myself. If you don't know who I am, my name's Amanda Evans and I'm a food safety compliance specialist with over 18 years experience working in food safety compliance. I started my life as a food inspector with New South Wales Health, looking after food manufacturing in food safety compliance within New South Wales, which is a state in Australia. When I finally got the lure of private industry and got out of government, I started my own consultancy business as a food safety consultant. And for the past, 9 years now, I've been a food safety auditor contract with NCSI BSI. I've also worked, and I still currently work, as a food safety HACCP compliance trainer. My other roles include working as a food safety consultant, where we look at labelling issues and putting together HACCP programs and basically, standard compliance issue type of stuff. So the purpose of my session today is to go through and educate you on how critical thinking can be applied to the management of food safety within your food business. So it's really looking at a different way of thinking, maybe not what you're used to. So hopefully will inspire some change in the way that you look at things within your business and around food safety and quality and compliance. The session will focus on how to apply critical thinking to 3 core areas. Mainly, we're going to be looking at complaint investigations, root cause analysis, and hazard identification and assessment. Now, if you have any questions at all throughout the session, there's a chat box there, should be on your screen. You can just enter your questions in there and I will answer them all at the end of the session. So I'll allow plenty of time to go through and answer questions. Let's have a look at our learning objectives. Is to go through and firstly define what is food safety critical thinking, if this is a new area for you. To go through, secondly, to identify the importance and benefits of critical thinking for food safety management. And then finally, how to apply these type of critical thinking skills to 3 core areas of food safety within your business. And those areas of what we said before: customer complaints, root cause analysis, and hazard analysis. Now, what I would like you to do first, just to get you in this mode and just see how you go, is on your bit of paper there, I'd just like you to fill in the blanks for these. So what's the thing that comes to mind first up? When you say the sentence, Mary had a little, fill in the blank. These boots were made for, fill in the blank. Happy birthday to you. Now, our natural tendency or our automatic reaction is to fill in these blanks with whatever the most obvious answer is. So in this situation, we would have, maybe the obvious answers were that Mary had a little lamb and the boots were made for walking and happy birthday to you. Now, if you were traditionally schooled or had a traditional education, this generally teaches us to answer quickly with the most obvious solution. And then we tend to stop thinking when we have the answer. We don't tend to go any further into as soon as we have the answer. So it's a bit like if you lose your car keys, once you've found your car keys, that's kind of the end of it. You don't take it any further. You found what you needed, so case closed, go on to the next thing. So we want to know in this side of it, well, why does this even matter? But it's this train of thought, if you jump to the obvious answer or use that automatic reaction, why does this actually matter? But it's this very train of thought that can bring us undone in business. And this is where we generally see this repetitive issue of recalls, customer complaints keep occurring, you tend to get the same non-conformances in audits. That's just an example of how your way of thinking has actually allowed you just to stop at the most obvious answer and don't tend to go any further than that. When we do this, when we actually just go back and we fill in the blanks, we move on, take whatever our first reaction is, this can then have an impact because it doesn't actually allow us to think a little bit outside the square of some other thing. It doesn't really allow, say for example in Mary Had a Little Lamb, it doesn't really allow us to explore whether Mary actually likes lambs or whether she'd actually prefer, say, a Ferrari or a Corvette instead, or a dog. We need to try and get past this automatic reaction to just take the first answer that comes to our head and move on, because doing this can be the downfall of our business. So let's have a look at what actual critical thinking means. So this is the scientific definition. Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analysing, synthesising and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning or communication as a guide to a belief and action. That all sounds a bit high level. It was a bit high level for me when I started getting into this stuff. So let's kind of break it down to some layman's terms, which is really how I like to apply everything in my life. So critical thinking can be seen as the ability to actually think clearly, to think rationally, to engage in reflective and independent thinking, be open-minded, identify reasons, assumptions and conclusions, ask appropriate clarifying questions, and be well informed. Now these two, the last two there, appropriate clarifying questions, forms a major part of critical thinking. And I see as an auditor, a lot of people don't ask these questions. And a lot of people are not well informed. So they only stay in their own little boxes, their little holes inside the four walls of their factory, and don't actually explore what's going on in other areas or other places, other businesses, other countries even, when it comes to food safety, risk management and things like that. So we want to have a look and see, how does the use of this critical thinking relate to the food industry and what you do? What I find generally is quality assurance managers, food safety managers, or the people in control of food safety within a business, they don't tend to have enough time. So it doesn't really allow them to go outside and look at other areas in how we can actually prevent the things that are happening in our business. Instead of just accepting what someone says, it doesn't allow us that time or that space to actually really get into that thinking side of things to see, well, how can we actually get a better solution, a better outcome, and make what we're doing in this business a lot better than what it currently is. Now, before I move on, I just want to talk about the benefits of this whole critical thinking process. Critical thinking helps us to go through and make sound decisions. So we've actually got a basis of why we made the decision that we made. It gets us to ask the right questions for the situation. It helps us to prevent and manage food safety issues and system failures, which is what I'm going to be talking about when I do my examples. It helps us to verify our actions. Again, this is providing evidence as to why we've made a certain decision and how we back that up. It helps move a business past basic compliance. So if you're really just in it for the certificate, the food safety certificate from your auditing certification body, this whole presentation is probably not for you, because you're not at the right level now to be thinking beyond just basic compliance. This is really about improving business and the way that you do things, which will in turn make it very, very easier, or it will make it easier for you in the way that you manage food safety within your business. And our final benefit is to go through and achieve an exceptional level of business improvement, innovation and growth. Going back to what Bill had said previously around culture, culture's around thinking. So if you're not thinking in the right mind or the right frame of mind, this is going to hamper how your business performs overall and how it grows. Let's have a look at the application in your food business. So at the beginning of the presentation, I said we're going to have a look at 3 different areas in which how we apply critical thinking. Those areas are going to be complaint investigations, root cause analysis, and hazard identification and assessment. Now, firstly, let's have a look at complaint investigations. Now, I'm sure everybody gets complaints. That's just part and parcel of it. If you don't get complaints, tell me who you are, because I'd love to come and buy my food from you if, it's all that good. But to be real about it all, every business will at some point get complaints and maybe get regular complaints. But it's what we do about these investigations will determine what happens again tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. So I'd like you to just have a think about your own complaint investigation that you're doing in your business now, and have a think about what is the purpose of your actual customer complaint investigation, and what do you want to achieve? So what is the purpose? Why do you investigate complaints? Why do you take customer complaints? And what do you actually want to achieve out of the whole complaint investigation procedure? So a couple of questions for you. Do you actually go through and gather your complaint details? I hope you do. Some businesses do, some businesses don't. Do you provide some level of compensation? So is that the automatic go-to? Once you get a complaint, you automatically either send out a gift voucher or a money voucher, or you give them a replacement product, or you give them a month's free supply of your product. Is that generally what you do straight up as a level of compensation? Do you go through and research and investigate the complaint to a level that identifies the actual root cause? So this is trying to find out why the complaint happened in the first place. From my auditing that I do, I see that people gather customer complaints and they provide a level of compensation. And that's about the extent of it all. We don't have a look and see why it happened or anything like that. We just want to get the customer happy, so we'll just give them some type of compensation. We don't really want to do that, okay? We want to actually think a little bit outside the box and go further into this third point of researching and investigating the complaint to a level that identifies the actual root cause. And the reason we want to do this is so the complaint doesn't happen again. So if you're seeing in your business that you have similar complaints that are happening month after month after month, that's a clear indication that you have not identified the actual root cause of the complaint. There's some other questions as part of your complaint investigation process that you should be asking yourself. The first one, is the complaint justified? This is a classic one. A lot of people say, oh, we couldn't get the complaint back, so we can't go and investigate it, so we just close it off. End of story. People don't tend to actually go a bit further into it and investigate based on not having the actual evidence. There are things that you can do around that. Looking to see, have we had any other complaints in the same product? And this is where trending comes in handy, and why a lot of the GFSI standards require you to do complaint trending to try and identify, is there complaints coming from the same product? If you're in an organisation that produces 24/7, you may not have the same person looking at complaints all the time. So unless the people come together at some point to discuss what complaints have come in and to see what products have been affected, you'll never know. They could all just happen in random isolation until someone actually starts joining the dots together. Have we had any complaints of the same hazard? So, for example, say we had let's say a piece of glass in a product. So if we go back and look at the history in your organisation, can you actually pull out the data to be able to say, yes, we had a glass complaint at this point, on this date, on that date? Is it possible for the hazard to occur in the product? So a lot of the times when I look at some of the information around this stuff, a lot of companies say, well, it can't happen in our product. It's just not likely. It's just not going to happen. We see time and time again, every time there's a major food poisoning outbreak, the first thing people say is, I didn't know it could happen in our product. And this really comes back to they haven't asked the initial questions to start off with. If you're saying no, what was the reasoning based on that it couldn't happen in your product? Is it because there's been a lack of research or a lack of knowledge? Most of the time it's both of these things. People just go the easiest option, lack of research. No, I can't be bothered doing that, or not can't be bothered, but don't have the skill, the time to do the proper research, or they don't have the adequate knowledge in what hazards are actually associated with either the raw materials that you're using or the environment in which you're producing product. If you say yes, that a hazard could occur in a particular product, have you gone through and assessed the complaint hazard in your hazard analysis, including what the consequence of that hazard is? I'm going to go a bit further into this in our hazard analysis side of things. You could ask the question of, was the hazard embedded in the product? Yes or no. This will be a reflection as to, or an indication as to where in the process that the hazard could have got into your product, whether it was at the end or whether it was inside the product. Could have been at the packaging point. It could have been at, say, the mixing point, if you have a mixing point. What is the incidence of this type of complaint in our business? That's the first question. We also need to then look at, what about our food sector? So looking at our competitors, have they had similar incidences? And what about the food industry as a whole? Just because it hasn't happened in your industry doesn't mean it can't happen. We see that time and time again when we see recalls that come out. Okay, our next part is looking at root cause analysis. So this is probably one of the most poorly done areas in the food industry. And it's not unusual for me to write a non-conformance or a corrective action request every audit that I do around root cause analysis. So there's plenty of systems out there on how to do this. There's the 5 whys. I won't go into all of them now, but there's different methods that you can use to do a root cause analysis on an issue in your business. The way that we know that people aren't doing this root cause analysis properly is if you keep having a reoccurrence of the same issue. So if you keep having the same customer complaint, if you keep finding the same issues, say the cool room is running outside of temperature, why is it happening? Why hasn't it been fixed? This mainly always comes back to food companies not asking the right questions, and also just stopping at the most obvious answer and then moving on. Food businesses stop asking questions at the most likely cause. And this may be for a number of reasons, whether it's a time factor or it's an education factor or it's a monetary financial issue. So I want you to have a think about, we're just going to do a quick activity on root cause analysis. Say that you've received the following non-conformance during your compliance audit. So the CAR raised was CCP monitoring records have not been signed by the person undertaking the monitoring activity. So this is a requirement through all the major GFSI standards that any CCP monitoring record has to be signed by the person undertaking the activity. To uncover the root cause of why this happened, what type of questions would you go through and ask? As a starter, have a think about that. What type of questions would you ask to find out why these records had not been signed? Some of the ones that I came up with. Ask yourself, Who is supposed to sign the CCP monitoring forms? So who's the designated person or the position? Ask the question, why did they not sign them? It might be something really obvious, like they didn't have a pen, or the form isn't designed in a way that allows them to fill out the information adequately. Why did they not know to fill out the form? So this really comes back to a training issue. Have they been trained in how to fill out the forms? Have they been trained, or do they feel comfortable with the culture within the organisation to actually notify their supervisor or management that, hey, this form is not conducive to getting filled out because of XYZ reasons? Why have they not been trained adequately? Has this come back to, again, not a very good training system? Financial resources don't allow training? Do people just get thrown into their job? It's just an assumption that people know how to fill out a form. So these are some of the questions that you can ask yourself around, just for that particular example. Identification of hazards and the assessment of hazards. So this is something that normally happens as part of your HACCP analysis, and it forms the basis of your whole HACCP program. If you don't get this bit right, this is where your whole system can fall down. When we start looking at hazard identification, you should not just accept what you have been told. And this is a classic thing when I go through an audit, that new QA managers or new staff come in and they inherit old HACCP systems, but they don't go through and question, well, what was the reasoning behind this hazard identification? Or why was this hazard not identified? You need to research, and do more research. I can't emphasize that enough. You have to get out of the mindset of just thinking, yep, 1 or 2 hazards, that's going to satisfy what we need to do. Yes, it may satisfy your auditor, but is it going to satisfy the business outcome of providing safe food? If you don't find out what all the things are that can go wrong in your business, you'll have no way of being able to put adequate control measures in place. And then you'll end up having a food recall, or poisoning somebody, or injuring someone through a foreign matter issue. What I'm finding more and more now as well is insurance companies, if you haven't done this part correctly, and if you haven't identified your risks and done an assessment correctly, your insurance will be affected by this, whether it be through premiums or even getting the insurance. When you look at hazard identification, you need to look outside your own backyard. Classic thing, it always amuses me when I see recall after recall after recall all around the world, doesn't matter what country it's in, especially ones around allergen labelling and not declaring allergens, cross-contact or cross-contamination with allergens. These are things that get released every single day. So why is it that businesses aren't picking these up and putting controls in place for them? You need to not settle for quick and easy. Your hazard identification and assessment part is the biggest part of your entire HACCP program. It's not something that gets done overnight. So if you have a consultant just comes to you and says, here's 3 hazards, here's 3 physical hazards, here's 3 micros, here's 3 chemical hazards, you can be assured that they have not done the research. Like I said, it's the biggest part of your entire HACCP program. And again, you should always ask questions. How do we know that that was a particular hazard? Where did it come from? Let's have a look at some of those questions that we would ask around this whole hazard identification process. Do you know where the hazards documented and assessed came from? Is there a history in your business? Has that actually been documented in some type of supporting document to your HACCP plan of where the hazards came from? What's the justification for the hazards? And the ratings that you gave them, the likelihood and the consequence and the overall risk rating. What was the thought process around selecting and assessing particular hazards? So again, when we have new QA managers or new HACCP team members come through, they just accept what's always been there, and they don't look at, okay, let's have a look at how did we come up with these. Was it really just one person on the HACCP team came up with all the hazards and the assessment based on what their own experience was, as opposed to a group effort? Can you justify the hazards documented and not documented? This is probably a big one. When I audit, I always go through the hazard analysis and see there's certain ones that I would expect to see in a HACCP plan as in a hazard analysis, and a lot of the times they're not there. Can you justify your risk ratings on fact rather than feeling? This is quite an interesting one, where people just make an assumption of, yep, I reckon that can probably hurt someone, or no, that'll never happen in our business, and they rate those things on emotion and feeling rather than an actual fact. Again, this is about looking outside of your own backyard and seeing what's going on elsewhere. Are the descriptors in your risk assessment tool clearly defined? So what defines something as a high, medium or low, if that's the system that you are using? What identifies something as likely to happen or never happen or may happen? You need to be very descriptive in the definitions of those ratings. Ask the question, has this hazard happened in our business before? Has this hazard happened in our industry before? Has this hazard happened in the food industry before? So that's looking at the big picture stuff in our food industry. A classic one I watched with amusement over the last few years, where we had the listeria and the rock melons in the States. This was an issue that I investigated. We had listeria poisonings and deaths from rock melons 18 or 15 years ago. 14 years ago in Australia. So why the industry hasn't learned from that to see, okay, well, this is obviously an issue. It's happened elsewhere. So what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen in our business? Same when you see listeria in lettuce. What questions could you ask? Let's have a look at a different one around the potential for metal contamination in your food product. Pretty straightforward thing. A lot of companies seem to get metal contamination. So what type of questions would you ask if you had to investigate this? In your hazard identification and assessment, have we ever had metal in our product before? If you have, go back to your hazard analysis and see, is it actually identified in your hazard analysis? What type of metal do we have in our factory? Is it ferrous, non-ferrous, stainless steel metal? What size metal would actually cause injury to a person if ingested? Does anybody actually know that? What size would cause damage? We know that metal detectors have their tolerances set, but that doesn't mean that a size smaller than what your tolerance on your metal detector is will cause or not cause injury to a person. How many recalls have there been in the last 12 months regarding metal contamination? Go through and do the research. All this information is freely available on the internet. You can look at your government websites to be able to find all of this stuff. Where could possible metal contamination occur in our business? And this ties very closely to when you do your GMP audits, and even going around and doing a foreign matter bag audit, where you take a bag around, you pick up everything that's could end up in the food product, and actually look and see, have we actually assessed that for likelihood and consequence in our finished product? So this kind of just gets you to start thinking, not just accepting what people tell you, not just accepting what's always been in your business, but to start actually looking outside the box, looking at hazards and trying to prevent them with a different way of thinking. Now, to recap on this, critical thinking in a food business involves you looking past the obvious to truly understand, prevent and manage your food safety issues. The answers you provide to your questions should not be limiting, but explore all sides and options. And we've looked at customer complaints, root cause analysis, and hazard identification and assessment. Now, each week I release a HACCP Mentor Review, which gives you practical compliance tips on how to address all of these issues within your food business. You can check this out at haccpmentor.com or www.haccpmentor.com. Or if you have any questions, you can always email me at Amanda@haccpmentor.com. I would like to take any questions from people now. Okay, so can you justify the risk rating? This is a big question in the food industry. Can we educate people in the food industry with this? Well, yes, this is what I've been asking you. Can you actually justify your risk rating? And yes, you can. When you look at risk rating, we talk about likelihood and consequence. So you can look at what is the likelihood for it to happen in your business. And this comes back to those descriptors that you allocate to likelihood in how you'll get your overall rating. What's the likelihood and can and will it happen? Okay, our next question. Can I depend totally for hazard ID and assessment on questions only, or do I need more data? So yes, you definitely need more data. So you need to ask the questions, get the information from the questions that you ask or the data to then go further on there for your hazard identification and assessment. Following HACCP leads to massive documentation, which in turn leads to human behavioural issues as they get fed up with maintaining so many documents. What is the probable solution to reduce behavioural issues in the manufacturing area? Well, that's kind of a bit of a deep question. You can't change people's behaviour overnight, and it does take a lot of training and it takes a lot of checking. With any type of compliance, if you're the QA manager, you need to be there to check that people are doing what they have to do. That's the only way that human behaviour is going to change. Now, I see this all the time with my kids. If I say to my son, have you made your bed? He may reply yes. If I don't go and check, if I leave it a couple of days, you can be guaranteed he'll go back to what's comfortable for him, and that would be not to make his bed because it's easier. So this is no different to adult behaviour when we look at this in the food industry. So you need to keep on top of that, and it's not an easy fix, but it's all about consistency in trying to address those behavioural issues in the manufacturing area. So thanks, Dippin, for that question. How can we find a hazard in a system? Again, this is research. The way that you can look at your hazards, if it's a micro hazard, there's plenty of information and data. Probably the best way to start with identifying hazards is to go through, look at recall information, look at the recall databases, see what people are having to recall their product for. If you're in the same industry or you're producing a similar product, you should have at least have those hazards identified within your system. If it's around foreign matter hazards, again, doing that foreign matter bag audit, go around and see what type of equipment, what type of things you've got around in your factory. Look at your premises, look at your people, look at your production, machinery, things like that. That's where all those type of hazards are going to come from. So that's a start. But there are plenty of resources out there that will give you information on the hazards. Cost burden or additional cost burden of critical thinking mechanism for food management. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but I'll take a guess. Is it worth the cost? It depends what you want to put your value on failing in your HACCP program by injuring somebody, having a recall, or causing a food poisoning outbreak. I don't think it costs any more, to actually think a little bit further what other people do. But again, it comes back to what are you trying to achieve in your business. If you're the concern there's not really around food safety, you really need to get out there and probably have a think about what industry you're in if that's the case. Could you recommend how an auditor should know new hazards of the food industry, for example, viruses in food? So again, this is where you keep up to date. There's plenty of the government websites are doing the research. There's food poisoning outbreaks happening around the world. You can look at this stuff. The World Health Organization put out research papers in new and emerging diseases that are coming through. As an auditor, or just as I'm asking a QA manager to keep up with the research, an auditor should be doing exactly the same thing. Okay, HACCP is usually a part of a food safety management program. Do you think it can be made into a program on its own? Well, generally the way that I work this is I have HACCP as a separate program. It's still all part of the food safety management system, so HACCP is just one component. So just like your pest control or your prerequisite programs are separate components of your entire food safety management system. Somebody asking for the best tool or technique in finding the root cause. I tend to, for me with my consultancy clients, I tend to go for the 5 why system. You just keep asking, why did it happen? So embrace your inner child and go back to when you were little where you used to ask, why, but why? So keep doing that. That's the best tool that I tend to use. It is traditionally taken that small fragments of glass or metal can be ingested and somehow get into the bloodstream. What would you say about the sizes of metal detectors? Well, again, this is the same thing as I said before. Your metal detectors are only going to have a certain tolerance, just like X-ray machines or any detection. We need to get back to the basics of what HACCP is, and that's about prevention. We need to stop it getting in there in the first place, rather than relying on this reaction to detect. Okay, we've got David here. I like the thinking of the out-of-the-box concept, but I think there could be a problem with some auditors that are not wanting to think outside the box, as some of them are holding firming to requirements and not leaving space for interpreting them. This can definitely be a big issue, and it's like any industry, you're going to have good and bad. So good auditors, bad auditors. There is, as I said, I'm an auditor. I audit for SQF, BRC, McDonald's, Costco, Aldi, Woolworths, Coles, a realm of standards. And there is a lot of pressure on auditors that may not allow them because they have to complete the requirements of the standard owner, and that is to complete what the audit, the things that we have to look at during the audit. And just the time allowance is quite cost prohibitive on a food business. We can't, I'd love to spend more time in an audit to actually dig down deeper, but unfortunately I just don't get that opportunity. So thanks for that, David. Felicia, regarding HACCP and foreign body control, are magnets without metal detectors sufficient for prevention of metal contamination? Again, magnets are just a screening activity. It's a removal, it's a detection. Yes, it is a control. Other people say it is a control, but we need to see why is the metal getting in there in the first place. If it's something that's coming in raw materials because you're having something from the field, you have to be able to make that decision in your business, what's best for your cost and risk wise, as to whether you would have magnets without metal detector on that side of it. Another question from Felicia regarding signing CCP monitoring forms. How do you identify when a form was signed retrospectively, especially when investigating a complaint at the supplier's facility? I actually wrote a whole blog post on falsifying HACCP records, which generated quite a bit of feedback. You can check out that blog post on my website at haccpmentor.com. But as an auditor, there are ways that you can tell whether people are dodging records. And sometimes I think that food handlers or people think that auditors are a little bit silly. I've been into audits where records have been filled out in advance. I've had temperature monitoring records filled out in advance. I've had records that don't marry up to dates and times that people were working or when the business was actually operational. Have a look at that blog post, and it'll go into that a little bit more. A question from Deepak. Root cause analysis needs to be extended beyond factory, extended into the supply chain. Yes, that's exactly right. So if one of the scope of your HACCP system includes procurement, this is where you would look into your supply chain from this side of things. And again, with your supporting approved supplier prerequisite program. What is the size of metal that causes injury to a person if ingested? This is going to be different for different people. So there are stats out there on this type of stuff. You can look at your government health department websites. May give you a little bit of insight into this side of thing. It is going to depend on the age of the person, the ability to swallow, what type was it? Was it smooth edge metal? Was it ragged edge metal? There is research on that type of stuff. Question from Walla: Who should make hazard ID and assessment in my food organisation? Well, this whole process is the responsibility of the HACCP team. That's why you put the HACCP team together, is to work on all this type of stuff. So again, it's not just something that happens overnight. It does take quite a long time to do this process, beyond a week and beyond a day. So don't just allow your consultant to do the whole job. You may have people in your business who have worked there for 20 odd years who can give you a better insight into things that have happened over that time to help you with this whole hazard analysis. Question from Luis about critical thinking. The logical thinking in the hazard analysis most of the time is based in experience and reasonable things can occur. Do you believe that even with all this experience and common sense in HACCP team, they need to look further even when the chances are really far? Well, honestly, yes, I do. The hazard analysis process and identifying hazards is about identifying everything that could possibly go wrong in your business. So you need to consider what's going on outside as well, because it may not happen in your business today, but it might happen a month down the track. At least you've got it documented. It may not be as likely. That's fine, but as long as you have identified it initially, you can then take action from there. Question from Sylvia: How do you manage critical thinking with hazards that the industry process cannot control, like salmonella in raw poultry or salmonella in pigs? Okay, so this comes back again as when you look at the scope of your system and the intended use of your product. If the intention is that your product is sold raw, it wouldn't be consumed raw, there are things that salmonella can be controlled to a level, and there's plenty of research in farming and agriculture to look at that type of thing. With that side of it, you can then ask the question, okay, we know that salmonella is in poultry. Yes, we know that. So what are the things that we do down the point? How do we assess those suppliers? The cold chain comes into it, looking at what the parameters of salmonella growth are. That can all be taken into consideration with it. Can we change CCPs through customer complaint after root cause analysis? Yes, you can. Of course you can. This is why you are supposed to do an annual review at a minimum of your HACCP plan, something that I know doesn't happen in a lot of businesses. They just sign off that they've looked at it, but they didn't. If you keep getting constant customer complaints, you go back and do your assessment. Your likelihood will change, which then may mean that you need to look at your control measures that you've got in place. Maybe the wrong control measures there. If it's critical, yes, it would then become a CCP. But you have to do that through your hazard analysis process, looking at that likelihood and consequence and what your overall risk is. Then going ahead and using the Codex CCP decision tree will give you a better definitive as to whether it is a CCP or not. Okay, well, I think that is all of the questions. Hopefully I got through everybody. I apologise if I didn't. If you do have any questions, as I said before, you can get me on amanda@haccpmentor.com, and you can go and check out my website at haccpmentor.com as well. So thanks very much for making the effort to tune in tonight. I wish you a fantastic day. Thanks.